Hello, and welcome to Season 2 of Between the Lines. On this podcast, you will hear about and from lesser-known Canadian authors and writers who, for whatever reason, have remained under the radar of traditional publishers and publishing houses. You will also hear from editors, literary agents, and publishers in the hopes of giving us all a better understanding of how it all works together. If it has something to do with writing or the writing process, you are going to hear a discussion about it here. I'm your host, Randy Lacey. I'm encouraging you to grab your bevy of choice, get comfy, and get ready to go between the lines. People come into writing in several different ways. For some, it was a teacher at school handing out a writing assignment, while for others, it may have been by reading and wondering if they might be able to write. Every writer has started their writing journey on a different path. Each writer's journey will be different, yet similar. But one thing all writers have in common is a different destination. Welcome to another episode of Between the Lines. Today, I will be talking with Brian Sankarsingh. I first met Brian in my Facebook writing group, Canadian Creative Writers. He had responded to an in-group post I had made regarding putting together an anthology about how the pandemic affected writers. Bigger dreams ensued shortly thereafter, and as I like to say, life got in the way. So, without any further ado, hello, Brian, and welcome to Between the Lines.
Thank you so much, Randy. It's just a pleasure being here. And thanks for inviting me to this amazing podcast.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll take that. Here's where I stand aside for a moment, a brief moment, and I'll let you, Brian, have the opportunity to tell everyone a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Thank you so much again. So, folks, my name is Brian Sankarsingh, as Randy said, and I'm originally from Trinidad. I actually moved to Canada in the mid to late 80s, and being an only child, it was quite the adjustment moving to a brand new place. And I wish I could tell you that I sunk myself into my writing, and I was just really amazed at the stuff I was able to produce. No, that's not the case. I actually, as Randy said earlier on, I found life got in the way, and so I went to work. I worked at the bank for almost 15 years, both in Toronto and again in Calgary. And it was only in moving back to Ontario that I actually found my voice and decided to write. And believe it or not, it was the onset of the pandemic, at the beginning of the pandemic, that I decided to write a book. And so that really is kind of what brings us here. I have two grown children, and a boy and a girl, and they're working. My son actually does some poetry. I've encouraged him to write, but like me, life is coming in his way as well. I've been married to my childhood sweetheart, and this will be our 27th year of marriage.
Well, congratulations.
So yeah, it's been quite the interesting journey so far.
As you were speaking, I think I've just adopted a new saying, and it's live a little, write a lot.
Yeah.
All right. So thank you for that, Brian. Let's get right into question period, and we'll start with, right at the beginning with question number one. What do you fear most as a writer?
I found this to be a brilliant question, because even though I thought about it, I internalized that fear. I never really gave voice to it. And so this question actually put me in a place where I had to revisit that thinking that I had about what I feared most about writing and how I overcame it, because it's something that it's a fear that I still have. And so my fear is actually, there's a name for it. It's an actual syndrome. It's called imposter syndrome. For your listeners who don't know what imposter syndrome is, it's actually classified as a psychological pattern in which an individual doubts their skills, talents, and accomplishments, and has a persistent internalized fear of being exposed as a fraud. And it sounds really, really heavy, and it is. But I'll tell you that that's my fear. I have written now 2 books of poetry, and I'm on to a 3rd book, and I'm writing other things as well, and I still can't bring myself to call myself a writer. And it's partly because of this imposter syndrome, and that fear is with me all of the time. That fear that somebody's going to expose me for not being an actual writer.
Doesn't that come down to your definition of what a writer is? Because to me, as soon as you apply a word to a page or a computer screen, you've written, you're a writer. It's the author part, I think, that we struggle with.
Yeah.
Calling ourselves an author, because like I said, putting any word to paper or computer screen or phone, or you instantly become a writer.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
and for me, my definition of it is so much different, because I see it as being a writer, as being part storyteller. And so it's not just for me, anyways. The word association between the two is that as a writer, I'm also telling a story, and that is often a scary thing to do, which is kind of why I'm actually thinking about ways to challenge myself to do that more, because this is not, the imposter syndrome is not something that's always with you. I wouldn't have ever said yes to doing an interview like this if it was always with you. It's just in those times often there's a silence around me anyways, and I have that fear. And so the more I find myself pushing my own definitions of what it means to be a writer and storyteller and poet, the more I find that I'm getting a little bit closer to recognizing the talent in myself. I remember saying to my wife's family, who are a family of musicians, brilliant musicians, fantastic, and they can listen to a song and just pick it out on a guitar or a piano. And I always saw that as creative genius. I never, ever thought about myself and my ability to write as creative genius or even creative until I held my first book in my hand.
mm-hmm.
And so, I think about people who might be listening to this podcast, who might be thinking to having that same fear. And you don't have to wait until you hold your first book. I think it's one of those things where you have to challenge yourself. You find in you, what is that thing that's causing me to have this imposter syndrome? What is that one thing? And you start challenging yourself in that area.
I don't know if you had a chance to listen to anything from last season, but the very last episode was an interview with Andrew Shaughnessy from the group. And during his interview, he actually said that he considers himself an imposter.
Yeah.
And so what you just said made me go, oh, okay, that's exactly what he was talking to or speaking about. So I'll have to get him to listen to this interview. There you go, Andrew.
There you go.
Well, that's a really good answer, Brian.
Thank you.
Apparently you did put some thought into it. How did you come to choose the genre you write in, or do you feel it chose you?
There's a funny story behind that.
That's why we're here.
Yeah. When I met my wife, we were teenagers, and she lived in Trinidad, and I lived in Trinidad at that time, and we were an item, and that actually birthed in me a real hunger for expression, and so. Around the same time, I was actually doing English literature and actually studying Shakespeare. And I found myself in just kind of lost in Shakespeare's sonnets. And that's kind of the genesis of where I started writing, was really being one, kind of head over heels in love with my then girlfriend, now wife,
mm-hmm.
but also really immersed in Shakespeare's sonnets and his wordplay and how he wrote. Fast forward to a couple of years, and on one Valentine's Day, a couple of friends of mine came and they asked me, "Would you mind writing a poem for me? I want to give this girl a rose, and I think if I can give them a poem, that'd be so cool." And so I sold my poems. I sold my poems to almost half my class.
Oh, wow.
At that point, and so yeah, that was in, I think it would have been in 1985 that happened, where I was selling poems. And so poetry had been just kind of in my soul for a long time. It was the way that I would express myself in writing. What literature, whether both at the because I was in Trinidad, we had the British schooling, so we had O levels and A levels, ordinary and advanced levels. I did advanced level literature, and what it did was it really challenged me to not only expand my vocabulary, but also challenged me to try different types of poetry. And so that's kind of where I started with this genre of poetry. Now, the thing is that I didn't stick with poetry. I actually wrote a play that was actually acted out in my school, in my class,
Cool.
when I wrote it. And I'd been, even as early as, I would say, around just prior to me starting to write my first book, I was actually thinking about writing a science fiction book, of which I actually have notes that have created the worlds and created the characters and their personality. And that was because I was really trying to find I knew that poetry was my language of choice, but I wanted to make sure that I wasn't pigeonholing myself, that I would open up my ability to try everything else. And so that was my first foray into trying something else. So did I choose poetry? I really don't think so. I think poetry actually was as part of my DNA from the very beginning, which is why I think, for me, I when I write poetry, I write it the way I do, which is kind of like in these huge fits of writing.
I can relate. Boy, can I relate.
Yeah.
This isn't one of the questions that I wanted to ask you, but you kind of brought it out of me. But I know for me personally, it's easier for me to say what I want to say on paper than it is with my mouth.
Yeah.
Do you find yourself the same way?
Yeah. Yeah. In fact, and I'll tell you what I did. I took your questions and I actually typed in what the points were I wanted to hit on.
Oh,
Because if I didn't type them in, I would never ever just be able to articulate them properly. So yeah, for me, it's easier. Like I find I would not call myself a gifted orator by any stretch of anyone's imagination, but give me a keyboard and I can write, and that kind of, it's weird because for me, I remember when I was a teenager, I decided to take typewriting, and this was on one of those old Underwood typewriters where
oh,
you had to
needed
mash
finger
the
muscles.
keys. Yes, you had to mash the keys, right? And I took typewriting as a subject, and I told myself that at the time, because I did it with a very, very close school chum of mine, and I told myself at the time that the reason I was taking it, because we were the only two guys in the class, was because it was a class full of girls.
Yep. I knew that was coming. Is that where you met your girlfriend and future wife?
No. But but actually, that would have been a great story. But no, but it actually, that learning to type on an old Underwood typewriter and learning to touch type on an old Underwood typewriter gave me the foundation, at least from a muscle memory perspective, of being able to transition into writing, into typing, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so that kind of was an obstacle that and I speak to some authors who talk about that being an obstacle, is just like sometimes they have to focus on the typing as opposed to the writing, so they tend to write with a pen and paper instead.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, that keyboard has become the pen.
Okay. So it's your symbolic pen.
Mm-hmm.
Wonderful. That's too bad you didn't meet her there.
Yeah, I know.
Dangerous story. Come on.
Yeah.
Next question. How many writing projects do you have on the go at any one time?
I was thinking about this question, and I want to give you my definition of a writing project. I see a writing project as what will, at a point in time, become a book. And I do writing. I actually do writing for work, and the work that I do also has such close representation to the writing that I do as well, that sometimes it feels like it's like I'm not even working, right? Mm-hmm. You know, they talk about do what you love kind of thing. That's not what it is. It's just that I don't feel I'm working, because I feel that I'm the things that I'm saying, both in my professional life and outside of my professional life, are in sync. And so I don't feel like it's a different thing. So for me, when I think about a writing project, I see it as a book, and I only write one book at a time. I only focus on one book at a time. And that's mainly because of how my brain works. I tend to choose a topic and then dive into it head first, deep end, start to do all my research. And so because of that way that I think, I just can't do it for more than one thing at a time. Mm-hmm. Now, that doesn't preclude the fact that I also write for my community newspaper. I do I submit a column twice a month for my community newspaper, and I actually started as part of that whole imposter syndrome, challenging myself. I just started something that I'm calling a satirical story, and it's called The Story of Everything. And so I'm writing in other arenas that's actually tied to my role as a storyteller, but I only write one book at a time because of just the way I approach things.
Very, very different for me, because I will start writing something and then I'll get an idea for something else. So I'll start that, set it aside, go back to what I was doing, and then I'll get another. So I've got like 3 or 4 different things on the go at any one given time, but only one that I focus on at a time.
Right. And do you find that sometimes you may miss one, that you go back and you go, whoa, I don't even remember doing this, and and then you kind of pick it up and just kind of run with it for a bit?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So I'm not alone?
Yeah.
What is your writing goal?
I love this question as well. I tell you, you have some of the best questions. I love this question. I sat and I thought about this, because at first I wanted to say, well, I just needed to express myself. That's not what it was. I had to go deeper with my thinking when I asked myself this question. It's, I think, saying that it's a means of expressing me and so on is just kind of like a cop-out answer. I actually want to leave the world a better place. I see this as an opportunity I feel that I have good and important things to say, and a lot of my poetry is centered around immigrants, immigration, racism, challenging racism, systemic racism, the obstacles that Black, Indigenous, people of color face. So that's kind of the sphere that I tend to do a lot of poetry and writing in. And I do this at work as well, by the way. So for me, it's just about really not even putting my message out there. I don't have a message. I want to challenge my readers to think of a thing differently. And the thing that generally I want them to think about is, the other person. What does that person who doesn't look like you, maybe doesn't talk like you, but what does that other person give to the world that you live in as well, and contribute to the betterment of society? So for me, it's about leaving the world a better place. And that may be one reader at a time. And I'm sure you, Randy, would have experienced something like this. I had, when my first book came out, someone came to me and told me that they got my book, they read it, and they decided to give it to their son who was going through a bit of a hard time, and that their son read this book and it really helped that person. And for me, that was it. I didn't need to hear anything else. If this book is never read by anyone else, it would not matter to me because
It
that
served its
was,
purpose.
yeah,
No,
yeah,
I agree with that wholeheartedly. I think you've heard me say this before in the beginning of some of my books, is I write not because I have something to say, but because there may be something you need to hear.
oh, brilliant, yeah, yeah,
Right?
exactly that.
And that's as simple as it gets.
It's just that I think that some people approach writing from that perspective. They approach it from, I have something to say, and I think I can become a commercial success through what I have to say. Maybe that's the approach that some people take it. But I think that for the most part, for me, it's been about the commercial success part of this. This equation has never been even a consideration for me. It's been about, this is something I have in my soul. This is something that I think I want to put out there because I want, like you said, you have something to say. You want that message there, but it's about actually connecting with that one person. And when you connect with that one person, that's enough, right? That's
Yeah.
just actually, it's more than enough.
My very, very first book, Blind Ambitions, which was published in 2013, somebody just recently read it and they found something within there that they connected with somebody they knew and sent it to them.
Mm-hmm.
And that person was like, wow, that speaks volumes to me. Yeah. And then she picked up another one of my books from the library and had it at home on her coffee table. And her daughter picked it up and started reading it. Mm-hmm. And her daughter's going, wow, I get this. This is me. And so, yeah, when you hear stuff like that, it makes it worthwhile.
Yeah.
Right. And like you said, that could have been the only person that made a comment or that it affected, and it was worth it.
Yeah.
I find when people really get down to that and that's what they really desire most is when they have the most success.
Yeah.
What do you consider the hardest part about your writing journey? Is it writing? Is it the publishing or the marketing?
My writing journey has been such an intentional one. When I decided to write my first book, because of my imposter syndrome kicking in, I decided that I wanted to self-publish, but not true self-publish. Think about it as boutique publishing because that's what it was.
Okay.
I paid the publisher, and the publisher, I gave them a book and they did it. And so I never find the writing as being challenging, again, because of how I approach it. What I find is that for my writing, I immerse myself in a topic. I'm actually in above my head in a topic that I want to write about. I don't ever think about writing it. I just want to immerse myself in it. I want it to be just kind of all in my head. I read a book called Contrarian Leader. And in this, it was written by a gentleman called Stephen Sample. And in this book, he said that the best way that he ever found to solve a problem was not to think about it. So he would actually get into his office, have a that he had to address, and he would lie down on the ground in his office and think about anything else but that. And so for me, I just kind of do the opposite of that. I just go in and I just allow all of the thoughts about that book, about that topic, to just kind of be in my brain. I don't think about writing it. I don't think about what I want to say about it. I want it to, and then it happens. So the writing part was easy for me. The publishing part, with my first book, like I said, I went and I did it via a boutique publisher. But what I realized after I did that was that I could truly do self-publishing, and I credit in large part the Facebook group Canadian Creative Writers that you've started, because that's kind of where in that Facebook group, in all of the fantastic discussions that have happened in that Facebook group, it actually dawned on me that this is something I could do. And so my second book, I actually went on to Amazon KDP and did that second book all on my own. I went out and I got my own ISBN, set up myself as a publisher, and did that second book. So for me, both experiences were in their own way really important and learning experiences, because they each showed me things that I needed to think about that I hadn't thought about before, that I didn't even know was something that a writer, or especially a writer, should be thinking about as they're thinking about publishing. So it was both really, really important learning experiences, and I will never regret doing either of those two. What is challenging for me is marketing. I am not a good salesperson. As you can tell, I suffer from imposter syndrome.
But going to what we've been talking about, that we're really not after the fame or the fortune, which usually comes with marketing, right? Because that's a dynamic result of the marketing. But we're not really chasing either of those. So does marketing really count for anything?
Yeah. For me, when I see marketing, when I think about marketing, it's not about the fame and the fortune. It's about getting people to know that my book is there.
Yeah.
That this is what my book is about. That, and to eventually for people to see it as what I intended it to be, kind of like its own self-help book, but from a different perspective. It's not telling you how to do a thing. It's telling you there is a thing that you need to think about, and you can change that thing. Right. And so so the marketing for me is about really getting the into people's heads that book is out there. Not so much, as you rightly said, not so much about the fame and fortune part of it, as much as it is about really getting. And so what that meant for me, for instance, is that when I ordered books from my publisher, I ordered a bunch of books from my publisher that I regularly just give out. I mean, like, I've just shared books because I want people to know that book exists.
I'm not sure if you're aware of this. If not, you're going to be now. But the people that I interview for this podcast, especially if they have a book out, I ask them if they'd be willing to donate a copy to my local library, because that way that puts their book in the library system, which is accessible all across Canada.
Yeah.
And it helps them for marketing, for one. And two, it's nice to see your book in a library.
Yeah.
So if you're interested in that, feel free to send me one. We can set that up a little later. I would recommend anybody who has a book to approach their library and see if they can donate a copy of their book to their library.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that was one of the challenges for me in publishing my book, because my first book came out in October of 2020, which was by then the second wave of the pandemic was in full blown, a full blown bomb in our society. We were totally locked down, and so I couldn't even launch it per se the way I wanted to. So that's something that I've had on my list of things to do, that hopefully as we start to open up more in the province of Ontario, I'll be able to do. But that's fantastic. Thank you for that offer.
Not a problem. And again, I give everybody that option, that offer. It's I think it's a worthwhile thing to do.
Yeah.
All right, moving on then. What is going on around you when you sit down to write? Is there music playing, or is there a dog nearby, or a cat, or are you eating, drinking something specific?
Life is going on around me when I write. I don't need quiet. I don't need, in fact, oftentimes I don't even need my keyboard and computer. I have found myself sitting, waiting for either my wife, because I took her to do something and she's off doing her stuff, and me on my phone in the notes app writing a poem that just kind of hit me. I have found myself waking up at 4 in the morning and doing that same thing, just kind of grabbing the phone and typing out this thought that just kind of blew into my mind. But and it all comes from the way I write. Like I said, I immerse myself in whatever the topic is, and then I allow my brain to just kind of, bring it out in whatever way it chooses to. I've had so many conversations with people. It's one of the funniest things. It has made me realize that just kind of start to picture how different our brains are. I talked to my boss, the person I report to at work, and I was saying to him, I was telling him about the experience of writing my third book, and that I sat down and I wrote a poem on the life of Malcolm X from his birth, from him being Malcolm Little to his death, to his assassination. And it's a close to 1,000 words. It's a long poem, and he said, I can't. When it comes to writing, I can't even write a paragraph without driving myself crazy. And you're telling me you just right? But that's kind of what happens, is that I have these huge spurts of writing, and I sit down, and when my brain is ready for me to write, I just allow it to happen, and that creativity just kind of flows. And then generally what I find after that is I'm spent. I'm tired. I can't even think about it anymore. And so I just set that bit aside, and I move on to the next topic in my book, whatever that next topic is. That doesn't mean I don't go back to that first poem and revisit it and play with it. It just means that I've moved on to the next part of that book. But I don't really care. I don't care what's going on. It can be busy, noisy, or quiet. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, there's some of the people I've talked to and interviewed, they from one extreme to the other. And then there's the people like you who it doesn't matter what's going on. Life can go on. I've been living life busy all my life. Why am I going to let that interrupt what I love to do?
Yeah. Is that your method of writing, or do you just need to kind of focus in on?
You know what? When I sense a flow come on, it doesn't matter what's going on. I'm into it. I'm immersed, like you said. I'm immersed into it. When the flow stops, I set it aside and walk away because I don't want to feel like I have to contrive anything to contribute more. Yeah. If the flow's there, the flow's there. If it stops, I walk away.
Yeah.
Or I move on to something else. And then I'll revisit it, like you said, and see if there's more. But yeah, if I'm flowing and the flow ends, yeah, I don't try to force it.
Yeah.
Because people can tell.
Yeah. I agree. And that's kind of what happens with me, is that when I finish that spurt of creativity, and mind you, it's not like it's a short spurt. Sometimes that spurt of creativity can last like 2-3 weeks, right? Or 2 days. I don't ever force it beyond what I feel. And so I don't ever think about it as, I hear often in fact, this was one of the first posts on Canadian Creative Writers that I answered, was somebody asked the question, what do you think about writer's block? And my response was, you know what, I don't have writer's block. I don't ever think about it in that way. I don't look at it as writer's block. I look at it as the opportunity to go immerse myself in whatever it is I plan to write about.
There's a lot of good questions that have come up in that group.
Absolutely. Yeah, really, really interesting.
I guess the last question, well, no, it's not. I've got another one. Surprise question that you didn't know about. Have you ever read a book and thought to yourself, I could have written that. I could have written this. And if so, which book was it?
I chose this because I knew the answer, and the answer was that. Well, first of all, I was an early reader. I was 3 years old when I started to read.
Oh, wow.
And I credit my dad for this, because I have these memories of me sitting on his lap with him holding The Guardian, which was the newspaper of the day, and he would ask me to read the articles for him. And so I read really, really early on. My first book that I read that didn't have pictures. I was like about 6 years old, and a cousin of mine gave me this book and said, "You've got to read this book." And I said, but there's no pictures. And he said, "This is going to be your first." It was my summer holiday I was spending by them. And he said, "This is your first book then. This is your first." And he was a voracious reader. He read lots of Westerns and, all kinds of books, all kinds of books. And so he gave me this book. And the book was The Adventures of Tom Sawyer by Mark Twain.
Mm-hmm.
And I have always, I loved that book. It became, I think in my life, I have read that book close to 150 times.
Oh, wow.
I still have it on my iPad. I every now and then I will, it's kind of like comfort food for me, right? Because every now and then I'll go and I'll just kind of blow through the entire book in one reading and I'll be like, yeah, that was good. But that book, the sentiments that happened in that book, the way he wrote that book, the things he wrote about, just the adventure of it, right? I remember there's one part where he talks about it. There comes a time in every boy's life when he goes in search of treasure. Oh, good grief. He had me 12 o'clock at night outside looking by the moon. So looking at the moon, the shadow of the moon and the tree in our yard to see where the tip of the tree was, searching for lost treasure. And so I never thought of myself as being able to match that book, but boy, I feel I could have just done that some justice. Because of how it inspired my youth, the adventure part of me. Yeah, it was just tremendous, at least from my reading of it, and so much so that even now when I read it, I hearken back to Becky and Tom and to his adventure with Huckleberry Finn in the graveyard. I mean, it's just like, I think I could have done that, and maybe I may feel that the inspiration to try something similar, that coming of age kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that's kind of the book that that would either make me or break me when it comes to writing.
Now, does it sadden you that he's not alive, that you could have written him a letter saying thank you?
Oh, tell me about it. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. It's what it meant to me.
Yeah. Is there anything you will not use as inspiration to write? Or, if you will, what will you not write about?
If you'd asked me this question as little as last year, December, I probably would have a different answer for you. But as of today, I can tell you there is nothing that I won't write about. And I'll tell you why that difference happened. Recently I was inspired to write in a subreddit that I'm a part of. I was inspired to write. Somebody challenged me to write about the origin of Karen. And in popular culture now, there is this trope of Karen being an entitled woman who kind of asks for the manager no matter what the issue is, that kind of trope. But the challenge was write a story about the origin of Karen, and so I actually wrote a story about the origin of Karen, and it blew up on the subreddit that I was on, and people were just like, a couple of people were just like, "Wow, this is crazy! I love this kind of thing," and that got me thinking about writing a very irreverent story. And this irreverent story is about the story of everything. And I'm actually doing it for free because I'm writing it, and readers can read it as I write it, one chapter at a time on my website. So every month I'm going to be starting in March. Every month I'm releasing one chapter that people can read, and this story is going to be about everything. It's going to be about religion and about politics and about culture and everything.
This book can go on forever.
It can. That was why I decided to make it for free, and that was why I decided to put it on my website because
That's almost ingenious, Brian. No, that's pretty cool. Wonderful, wonderful. I'm almost at a loss for something to say, but this brings us to part two then, which I will entitle Shake Your Moneymaker, because this is about putting yourself out there and letting people know, where to find you and stuff like that. So what works do you currently have in publication? Again, a chance to plug your most recent, but not limited to that. So you've got 1, 2 books, and you're working on 3.
Correct. My very first book is called A Sliver of a Chance: Insights and Observations of a Canadian Immigrant, and it really looks at a number of big things: racism, immigration, colonialism, and it's all poetry, by the way, but it's poetry presented sometimes quite in a quite different way and entertaining way, I hope. So that was my first book. It was my first foray into writing and to really jumping into the writing pool, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
My second book, which is a self-published book, is called The Human Condition, A Poet's Perspective. And for that one, I actually went and found some people who I felt were talented poets, but who had never been published before, and asked them to write about certain topics for me for this book. And so I feature some of their poetry in this, but it is predominantly my poems as well. But their poetry is peppered in. My son actually wrote several poems for this book as well. And so those are my 2 published works. I also did I belong to an association in Ontario called the Immigrant Writers Association, and the Immigrant Writers Association is an association that of immigrant writers that tries to really lift immigrant writers in Ontario and give them a voice and give them a place, a forum in which to speak. And they do a annual anthology, and last year was my first contribution to their anthology. So that was another book that I had contributed to. This year they're doing it again, and I'm also contributing to it. It should be coming out sometime in just after the end of summer, maybe around August, September.
So the anthology that I'm glad you brought that up, because if you didn't, I was going to bring it up because I knew that about you. So that anthology, what's it called?
It's called Moving Forward. So every year, the Immigrant Writers Association chooses a different theme, and they ask their writers who are part of the association to write in any genre that they write in, whether it's in real life, in other words, nonfiction genre, or they write in a story or whatever, mm-hmm. or poetry, to write along that theme. And so the one that I contributed to it's called Moving Forward, and it was really about the immigrant who has come to a new place, and they are now trying to kind of move forward in this new country and build their new life in this new country.
So kind of like find their next step.
Correct, yeah, and really find out who they are, really and truly, right? And so that was the one that we did last year. This year, the 4th anthology is called Finding the Way, and so what this one is kind of really focused on is now that this immigrant has come and has started to really become a part of the society and become a part of the culture that they're in. What's next, right? How do they define that new beginning, start that journey, be that person, grow into that role. So really, it's kind of like a journey on its own. And so this book called Finding the Way, I'm really, really excited about it because I took a totally different approach in this writing, in that I mixed story with poetry. So the protagonist in my story, he is a poet from Iran, and he writes as part of his own catharsis, and he is also an immigrant to Canada, and so he writes about his journey. So that's coming out, like I said, sometime in this year.
Fantastic.
Really, really interested in seeing what the response to that would be.
In your opinion, are the anthologies well received?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Generally, actually, it's interesting. Like I said, for me, it was humbling, and it was exciting at the same time to be able to participate in this. And when I sent my submission in, truly, like I say, I suffer from imposter syndrome. I sent my submission in, and I never really thought it would ever make it, And it's the first one in the book, and it really has helped me and other people to find me because of that submission.
Fantastic. That's really cool. Do you presently have anything you're working on, and how close is it to being done, or how close to completion is it?
So the anthology is what I'm doing, with the Immigrant Writers Association. But over 2021, I spent all of 2021 in writing, and the book that I wrote, it's tentatively called Enslaved, A Chronicle of Resistance. And it is part poetry, part history, part story.
Whose history?
And it's the history of slavery and systemic racism.
Okay.
So it's the history of a character that I created. So just to give you a sense of how this book is, this book is close to 400 pages long. So it may actually come out as 3 different books, because it's 3 different eras that I write about. I write about the era of the 1800s to emancipation, or the 1700s to emancipation.
Okay.
And that's more fictitious. So there's a fictional character that I trace the history of this fictional character. Then the second era, and there's about 45 poems in that era. In the second era, it's called Freedom Bells Are Ringing, and it's about emancipation, and it goes right through to the death of Martin Luther King Jr.
Okay.
And it really covers that entire time period. So talking about people like Nat Turner, which many people don't even know who Nat Turner is. The looking at what the different segregation de jure, segregation and Brown versus Plessy court cases. So this is where I start to get really historical. There's a lot of footnotes in this one, but it's poetry, and it's intermixed with actual storytelling amidst the poetry. There is something like 67 poems in this one. And then era 3 is called Hidden in Plain Sight. And the intent of era 3 was to really bring it home, and, kind of tracing the root of systemic racism and how systemic racism became a thing. And so in era 3, we're talking about systemic racism because it's hidden in plain sight. You don't often see it, but you experience it as a Black person, an Indigenous person, or a person of color. And so this era is really kind of looking at what are the areas that even in Canada, we see it. And of course, absolutely south of the border. But what is systemic racism? What is that is affecting people, and how can we deal with it as a society? And again, there's a lot of present day things. So it's, again, a lot of footnotes in there relating to real life things that go on. So Right now, I'm in the process of looking for a publisher for this one because of just the hugeness of this project. Like I said, it's 400 pages long, and I felt that to do it real justice, because of the content and the what this message is, that it would behoove me to find a publisher for it.
Mm-hmm. When you first started talking about your third book, in your description, and from what I was hearing and maybe what I was remembering, is, do you remember Alex Haley, Roots? That's
Yes.
what I was thinking as you were describing what you were trying to do.
It's amazing that you say that, because in my acknowledgments, that's what I said. I said that inspiration for this comes from Alex Haley's Roots.
Wonderful.
And it's Alex Haley's Roots in poetry form.
Wonderful. Not that I like to get political or, anything like that, because I don't, because, I mean, you believe what you believe, I believe what I believe, and I think we're entitled to that.
Yes.
But systemic racism is defined in so many different ways by so many different people. Yeah. If there was one standard definition that we could all go by, it would be so much easier to eradicate.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's as political as I'm going to get.
Yeah, it's a really good observation, and believe it or not, we in this book addresses some of those things. I really wish I could just kind of throw out some of the table of contents of this book.
Go ahead.
I have it, for example, there's O Canada Part 1 that talks about what we believe to be systemic racism in Canada. O Canada Part 2 talks about, and so I actually write four different poems that looks at to your point about racism, systemic racism, and what it means and how it affects different people in different ways, and how do we start to contextualize that. So that was the idea behind it. I also have a number of poems that try to help the reader, because my intent is really, the intent of this book is really to help, not just to help people, white people, understand what systemic racism is, but to help even BIPOC people, Black, Indigenous, people of color, to help contextualize it for them, because when we talk about it, when I talk about, for instance, being profiled, to my Black friend, to my Black teenage friend, they have a totally different view on it and how it affects them. Mm-hmm. And so we have to capture that view. We have to understand the context of that view. And so, yes, I agree with you. And that was kind of part of the reason for really pointing it out in that way. But I wanted to not just start by pointing it out, but show that there's a history to this. And because there's a history to this, there's actually threads that you can pull on that will take you back to that history.
Yeah. Unravel the mysticism behind it.
Yes. Yes.
Now, this will probably get edited out. Have you ever met a blind person who was racist?
No.
Well, okay. So, I mean, assuming being racist is associating color to a person, mm-hmm. right? Have you ever met a blind one? No, because they're just people.
Yeah.
Right. And all my life, that's how I've been. I've gotten along with everybody.
Yeah.
Right. But now that I'm visually impaired and mostly blind, I just think that's such a great thing for me, because, I love everybody. Yeah. I don't care what color your skin is. I don't care what your accent is or whatever. You're a human being just like me.
I don't think you should add that out. That's brilliant.
Oh, all right. Is there one of your books which you are more particularly fond of, and why?
No, I see.
I like them all.
Yeah, I see each of the two books that I have and this third book, even though I spent an inordinate amount of time on the third book, I see each as really parts of myself that I put onto paper, and so I don't like my pinky finger better than I like my index. So no, I don't.
And you wouldn't be a complete person without either.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Wonderful. Good answer. And for $100, no, Alex, I'll take number 4.
Oh yeah, I thought about these.
Where can people connect with you? Things like email or website, snail mail, if you still do that, blog, Meta, or formerly known as Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, whatever. So where?
Yeah, so I'm on Facebook. My Facebook page is called Brian the Poet. That's also my website, brianthepoet.com. I found it was just really catchy, Brian the Poet. Even though I write other things, Brian the Poet sounds so catchy. It's easy on the tongue. And so that's my website, www.brianthepoet.com, and on Facebook, Brian the Poet. My email is right on the website as well, so people can contact me there. Really don't do Instagram per se. And my Twitter, I share my Twitter account with work and my poetry. And so it's at Ssnkarsingh on Twitter, and again, it's people will find that I talk about work and poetry there.
You want to spell your last name for the people, please?
Sure. It's at Ssnkarsingh, BSANKARSINGH.
Thank you.
And the email is Brian the Poet, just BRINTHEPOET at Rogers ROGERS.com.
Fantastic. And that's it? That's all we need to know?
That's all we need to know.
And is all of that stuff on your website as well, though?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. And links to where they can buy your books and all that sort of stuff?
Yeah. Links to the reviews that I've got on the books, links to where you can get the books, actually even links to all of the writings that I do outside of my poetry. So like I said, I write for my community paid newspaper. So those links are there as well.
Wonderful. Brian, thank you so much for agreeing to do this podcast. It's been, well, I knew you a little bit already, but this gave me an opportunity to get to know you a little bit more, and I feel the better for it. So again, thanks for agreeing to do this, and have yourself a wonderful rest of your weekend and life.
Thank you very much, Randy. I totally enjoyed it. I hope this podcast gets tons of listeners. So there you go.
You have been listening to Between the Lines. In future episodes, I will not only be speaking with Canadian authors and writers, I will also be speaking with those from the other side of the writing industry, editors, agents, and publishers, in the hopes of getting a better understanding of how it all works together. If you liked what you heard, hit the subscribe button to be notified of new episodes and content. Send all your comments, suggestions, or any questions you'd like to have a guest answer to me at randy.btlpodcast@gmail.com. Be sure to visit me at www.therandylacey.ca. While there, look for the Buy Me a Coffee button to help support the podcast. Thank you for your time and your ears. Tune in, be inspired, and write on.